relative quiet, because the Townsend duties are repealed, except for one, right? The tax on tea. And for a 3-year period between 70 and 73, there's kind of, little activity, little animosity between Britain and the Colonies. Oh, what were the committees of correspondence? I mean, I think that happened in this time period. Ben, do you recall the committees of correspondence?
They were formed by Sam Adams to keep up the spirit against the tea act.
Yeah, they were each colony legislature had a committee that would, send information to other legislatures about what was happening in Britain. Right, it's the first kind of intercolonial activity, formalized intercolonial activity. Hey, what breaks this relative quiet? What does Parliament do to kind of break this period of relative quiet wide open? Yes?
I think the East India Trading Company monopoly tea.
And that's called what piece of legislation?
Tea Act.
The Tea Act. Now the Tea Act is going to give the British East India Company this monopoly over tea. It is going to result in cheaper tea for colonial Americans, but there is this response by many colonial Americans suspicious of this, fearful of this, thinking that this is a way to solidify, the notion of taxation without representation, and it all results in the Boston Tea Party, right? Well, not all of it. Some of it results in the Boston Tea Party. Now, the Boston Tea Party is a turning point. They dump the tea into the harbors, the destruction of property. How does Britain respond to the Boston Tea Party? What's the significant response of Britain to the Boston Tea Party? And it must have been a hurry culture. Go ahead.
The coercive act?
Yes, the coercive acts. What did the colonists call the coercive acts? Yes, the intolerable acts. And the one that we mentioned sometimes is considered to be the harshest one. It's the only one I mentioned. I told you to read the other ones.
They shut down the Boston.
They shut down the Port of Boston. Oh, what was the Quebec Act? Didn't talk about this in class, but I think it might be on the test. What was the Quebec Act? Anyone besides the instructor? Anyone at all besides the instructor, the Quebec Act? Chica, right?
Yeah. It's guaranteed Catholicism to the French Canadians.
Yes, I mean, an aspect of the Quebec Act is that they guaranteed the French Canadians could practice Catholicism. But in a larger sense, the Quebec Act was Britain's response to what it had acquired as a result of the French and Indian War. All the territory west of the Appalachians, all of Canada. What's going to be true then? How are we going to handle it? How are we going to treat these people? Well, the Quebec Act sort of established the relationship between that area and Britain. The colonists found the Quebec Act offensive. They found it offensive. The fact that it kind of recognized Roman Catholicism, they found offensive. And they even considered the Quebec Act to be part of, like, the intolerable acts. So you might want to take a look at that. What was the most important response that the colonists had to the intolerable acts? What do they do? This is big. In response to the intolerable acts, they call for what? First Continental Congress. Hey, that First Continental Congress that meets in Philadelphia, when they went there, did the delegates of the First Continental Congress shake their fist and say, we need to declare ourselves independent? No. First Continental Congress meets in September of 1774 in response to the intolerable acts, and they do a number of things. They protest the intolerable acts. They suggest that the colonists arm themselves, in case they have to fight in the future. But one of the things that they don't do is suggest that they were moving towards independence. So the First Continental Congress meets to basically protest and attempt to sort of get Britain to recognize and acknowledge their grievances. And it does represent kind of a colonial unity in support of Boston, which the intolerable acts were designed to punish. Now, in the aftermath of the First Continental Congress, we said, Gage, who is the military commander of troops in Boston and now the governor of Massachusetts, moves against what he considers to be the troublemakers and their attempts to gather arms and ammunition in Concord and Lexington. And so we talked a little bit about Concord and Lexington, and boy, was that big. I mean, that was really big, the discussion of Concord and Lexington. And we said that, look, you know, Concord and Lexington are the first battles of the Revolutionary War. They're the first battles of the Revolutionary War. And in the aftermath of Concord and Lexington, the Second Continental Congress convenes in May of 75. Now, the Second Continental Congress never goes out of session. Right? The Second Continental Congress morphs into Congress once the war actually ends under the Articles of Confederation. So the Second Continental Congress is going to be in session from 1775 through 1783, the end of the war, through 1788 when the Constitution is ratified. The Second Continental Congress is replaced by the Constitutional Congress that is established under that, which we haven't talked about yet. Countries kind of did, you know, today. So the Second Continental Congress is the Congress that guides the country through the war. And in that Second Continental Congress, one of the most significant things that they do is appoint a commander-in-chief. And they appoint Washington. Why? What's the biggest reason they appoint Washington to be the commander-in-chief of, yes, sir?
Because the colonists trust him as a leader.
Maybe. Probably not as much yet. Yes, bigger than that. He was from where? He was from Virginia. So if the fact that he was from Virginia was maybe one of the biggest reasons why he was appointed, his appointment was largely political. Political because the Massachusettsians, if that's a word, wanted to get the Virginians to support the effort. And how to do that best? Appoint a Virginian to be commander-in-chief. I mean, there were probably people that had equal experience to Washington. You know, and Washington himself did not expect to be appointed commander-in-chief. But it was prudent politically for that to occur. And so it did. I have a question on here about African Americans during the Revolution.
Ms. Corbett, please call 5741. Ms. Corbett, 5741.
So you should talk about it, or you should read about it in your textbook. Now, once Washington, even before Washington arrives, remember we said the bloodiest battle in the entire Revolutionary War was fought. Where was that, dear Jowsey? Bloodiest battle in the entire Revolutionary War. Bunker Hill. Bunker Hill. Who won that battle? British.
Well, Americans had to give it up once.
Right. Americans had a moral victory. Britain eventually took the hill. Right? Why did the Americans abandon the hill? Yes. They ran out of ammunition, correct. Now, when we look at the Revolutionary War, kind of look at it in three geographic areas. First part of the fighting is in New England. Then where does it move to? After the British abandoned New England, where do they move to? First part of the fighting is where? They move to New York, right? They abandon Boston, right? And then they invade New York. And then they invade New York and they try to cut New York off, and they fail where? What's the significant battle in 77? Saratoga. All right? And after they fail in Saratoga, where do they move? The south. So it starts in New England, moves to the middle colonies, and then moves to the south. Right? Now, the whole thing could have ended, right? The whole thing could have ended in the winter of 76, 77. Darn it. That's when things were coming the most unraveled. Where did Washington attack in late 76 and early 77 to sort of keep the American hopes alive? Do you remember anybody better? Trenton and Princeton, right? And that's the crossing of the Delaware. Hey, what was the Olive Branch petition? We're going quickly now. We're going quickly now. Whom can we call upon besides Shrees answering all the questions? Go ahead, Belay.
It declared the colonies in rebellion.
No, the Olive Branch petition was that desperate attempt by the Continental Congress to reach out to the king. And remember, the king brushed aside the Olive Branch petition, and this is in the summer of 75. You know, the summer of 75, the Continental Congress appoints George Washington. Bunker Hill occurs. The moderates in Congress, you know, encourage Congress to reach out with an Olive Branch petition to the king. The king rejects that Olive Branch petition and declares the colonists in a state of rebellion. Now, that's still not enough to turn the tide of public opinion towards moving towards independence. What does it take? What did we say was the big event, or not event. What was the big thing that turned the tide of public opinion? Good. Common sense. Who wrote that? Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense, and Common Sense argued that it was common sense that America, a colony or a continent, would be separate from an island. And in Common Sense, Paine argues for American independence in a number of different ways. And he also argues for a democratic republic, independence and a democratic republic to replace it. Right? And so after Common Sense, then the movement towards the Declaration of Independence, picks up steam. And I'll go quickly. I know the hour is late. But remember, Common Sense is January of 76, right? In June of 1776, the tide of public opinion had pretty much turned to towards independence. And Richard Henry Lee makes the fateful proposal: these colonies are and ought to be independent states. And this is on June the 7th. June the 7th, 1776. Now, once that proposal was made, once that resolution was made, there was a time period between when that resolution was actually, kind of ratified by Congress and when it was made, which was almost a month, right? And in that time period, remember, a committee was dispatched to do two things. Well, two committees were dispatched. One committee was dispatched to write a declaration or explanation of independence, and we discussed all the reasons why, that the Continental Congress had an interest in explaining why they were seeking independence. And another committee that was dispatched to create a system of central government. And the system of central government that they created was the Articles of Confederation. This is all happening at the same time. Now, we talked a lot about the Declaration of Independence, and certainly in the Declaration of Independence, the Lockean argument is made. The Lockean argument is simply this: look, all people have rights. The purpose of government is to protect and ensure those rights. If government is unable or unwilling to do that, then the people have an obligation to replace the government with one that can, right, or should. And that's what was argued in the Declaration of Independence. And it was argued to audiences across the world, right? Now, in the aftermath of the Declaration of Independence, we said that this, to some extent, forces Americans to choose. Do I support independence, or am I going to remain loyal to Britain? The people that decide to remain loyal are called loyalists or Tories. Right? The people that decide to remain loyal are loyalists or Tories. The people who support independence are patriots or rebels. Right? Patriots or rebels. We talked a little bit about the profiles of kind of these people. I mean, we talked a lot about this, I think, one day. We were talking, we said, well, most people in America either were indifferent or loyal, right? The number of people that were adamantly supportive of the cause of independence was really less than 50%. That most people in America were straddling the fence, indifferent, unsure, or loyal. And, we talked about the characteristics of the loyalists. On some level, it seems to me that you could say it this way. The loyalists were people that had something to lose by supporting independence. So therefore, they tended to be better educated, wealthier. They had something to lose, with exceptions, certainly. And you should be familiar with their profiles, right? The loyalists and the Tories. And, the loyalists supported, sometimes with their lives, the cause of independence, or the opposition to independence. Why was the Battle of